Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 5th of April 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comments. Coming up in the show, Witcher 3 will be DRM-free. CD Projekt Red explains why. Sega Europe admits to misleading Colonial Marines trailers. Chris Avellone joins Torment design team. And League of Legends character Sejuani gets more of a practical redesign. In a move that is sure to surprise pretty much nobody ever, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, the forthcoming RPG from CD Projekt Red, needless to say the sequel to Witcher 2, will not include digital rights management, and the studio themselves has said they will be trying to move away from DRM altogether. Now, in an interview with a guy whose name I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, let's just say is one of the game designers over at CD Projekt Red with Kotaku, said that we're trying to get rid of DRM, but if someone wants to pirate the game, eventually he will, which is bad of course, but you can't really do anything about it. We want to give the best user experience possible. When we removed DRM, people on those torrents were actually asking people not to download our game because we weren't using DRM. Witcher 3 is scheduled for release in 2014 on PC as well as PlayStation 4 and whatever the balls the Xbox is going to be. Well, I can't say I'm really surprised. I mean, if you spoke to any of the CD Projekt Red guys last year, and of course just even look at GOG, which is a site which is pretty much DRM-free across the board, then it's fairly clear to note that these guys do not believe in DRM. And as a direct result, what ends up happening is their stuff gets pirated to all hell. Witcher 2 was one of the most pirated games that year, although they did succeed in selling a great number of copies nonetheless. Recent sales figures as of February 6, 2013 indicate that the series sold over 5 million copies, which is across Xbox 360, Windows, and Mac, which is pretty damn impressive as far as I'm concerned. In terms of how many times it's been pirated, it's fairly difficult to say, but in an interview with the CEO of CD Projekt Red, they indicated that their numbers said that The Witcher 2 was pirated 4.5 million times as of November 30th, 2011. That's kind of crazy, isn't it? Quite frankly, if you compare that to its actual sales figures, bear in mind the sales figures were taken in 2013, that's kind of nuts. A few months before that, the game had sold a total of 940,000 copies, so the piracy rate was obviously a lot higher, but the sales figures have gone on over time. Now, the interesting thing about this is that I believe it very much proves the long tail idea of sales on the PC. The notion that games continue to sell on the PC at various price points. I mean, just look at the difference there. Game came out in May 17th. As of August, there were 900,000 or so copies sold. Then, of course, it rolls on, and it was released on Xbox 360 as well. And then, by February 6th, 2013, 5 million copies sold. That's a lot of copies, especially considering that the game has been out now for over 2 years. It's hard to say how many of those copies were sold on Xbox 360. I hope a great deal of them, considering it was one of the best ports that has been seen on that particular machine. They spent a long time getting it done. But even then, you can see that there are people continuing to buy this game. Every time this game goes on sale, it gets a bunch more copies sold. And it works pretty damn well. And yes, piracy is obviously a problem. I would have preferred that nobody pirated that game. But what it does show is that there isn't necessarily a correlation between bad sales and high piracy. In reality, popular stuff gets pirated more. There's a reason why Game of Thrones is one of the most pirated series on the internet. In fact, there's a lot of different reasons why that is, including, of course, the rather archaic distribution method that is being used by HBO in this regard. But it's because it's a popular series, and yet even then, it is extremely popular on television. It's making a lot of money for HBO, even though it's a very expensive series. So piracy is really something that affects stuff that's good and popular. And it doesn't matter how much you DRM something that's good and popular, it will be pirated anyway. Now, in my honest opinion, I feel that at this point, the delaying tactics that are being used by companies that actually utilize DRM, because let's be honest, that's what DRM is, right? DRM stops dumb people, and DRM stops impatient people. Those are the two kinds of people that DRM stops from pirating stuff. DRM usually holds up for a little while. Not too long, but a little while. There are some extreme examples like Assassin's Creed 2 that took a while to really crack. SimCity has not been properly cracked yet, even though people claim otherwise. And then you have to think, well, how many people just suddenly gave in because they couldn't be bothered to wait for the working crack to come out? Especially the fact that a lot of these developers actually put in multiple layers of DRM and have methods to detect basic cracks. You know, the whole thing is all about trickery for the most part. It's about fooling people. They think, oh, right, I found a nice, easy way to crack it, release the crack, and then you get about 6 hours into the game, and then suddenly the game breaks for no apparent reason, then you have to go back to the drawing board. It's, again, all about delaying, and making sure that impatient people give in and buy the legitimate version. That's what DRM is actually for. The thing is that that isn't working so well anymore, in my opinion, especially not on PC. The reason I believe that is the case is because more gamers are willing to wait until the game goes down in price, because they know it will. Yeah, you just look at Steam and you will see the sales culture is there. It is rife across the board and on other digital distribution platforms, and that is inspired by the success of Steam. So if you wait and if you're patient, you will be able to get a game significantly cheaper, and you might not even have to wait that long to do it. So there's no point in really DRMing a game and employing delaying tactics when people are just going to sit around waiting for the thing to get cheaper anyway. In which case, what needs to be done is the notion of embracing the longer sales cycle. However, the flip side of this, of course, is that if you don't put any DRM on your product at all, then it can tempt some people to just take it. The idea is that you encourage people to buy the game based on the fact that you're doing them a solid. I think that's the appropriate term for that. You are doing them a favor and giving them respect as consumers by not putting some crappy DRM on the product, which may very well cause problems for the end user. And that respect, you hope, will be returned. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it is. Obviously, CD Projekt thinks that this will be the case. I don't feel that any kind of DRM they could have thrown on this, aside from some always online bollocks, which would have got them more negative press than you could possibly imagine, would have actually slowed down piracy enough to even be worth doing. It's a popular game. It's a big single-player RPG. Single-player games are prime targets for piracy regardless of what you do. So why not just earn some points with the consumers? Why not engender consumer goodwill in the process? It's a good business model. It seems to work for those guys, and I hope it continues to. The UK's Advertising Standards Authority has held Sega to account over the subject of Aliens Colonial Marines trailers and advertisements published on its website and via YouTube. The complaint was originally submitted by a Reddit user by the name of Subpar Dave. Lord knows what his real name is, but whatever the case, he claims to have submitted the complaint to the Advertising Standards Authority, and it was because of the, quote, absurd differences between the actual trailers themselves and the final game, which, as you are well aware by now, is all kinds of rubbish. The Advertising Standards Authority, which is a self-regulatory organization of the advertising industry in the UK, stated in their reply that they believed that the complaint was worthy of being upheld and had spoken to Sega Europe. Now, while Sega Europe claimed that the trailers themselves were based on the in-game engine, they did acknowledge that the trailers depicted footage from demo versions of the game, not in fact the final product. As a result, they also agreed to put disclaimers on the online trailer on their website and on YouTube. This also means that the case is catalogued on the website asa.org.uk and will remain there for quite some time, as a little note that said this company has been very, very naughty. The ASA believes that as a result of the disclaimer, it is very unlikely that consumers will be misled by the footage. I don't know if that's actually the case. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm pretty happy that the ASA is doing its job. They're pretty good at this stuff. You know, I come from the UK and I have a certain amount of respect for some of these agencies because they do a pretty good job of making sure that people don't get intentionally misled by advertisements. And that's good. It's very, very good. However, in this case, I don't really know if it goes far enough. I don't agree with the assertion that it's unlikely that people will be misled as a result of this disclaimer. The thing about the disclaimer is it disclaims it as footage from the demo version. Now, to gamers, what this means is the unfinished version. What that means to most people, going to the logical conclusion is, oh, that's what the demo looks like? The finished product must be much better. And that's, of course, where they're wrong. In this case, absolutely not. Usually, when you play a demo, it will say, hey, yeah, this is unfinished, it's going to be polished, there's going to be problems, blah, blah, blah. And everyone kind of gets over that. Everyone accepts that idea. Unless you're unrealistic, in which case, hey. But most people, most reasonable gamers accept that idea. But this is the opposite. The problem with that footage is it comes from that vertical slice of gameplay, which was really just a pantomime. It wasn't actually the real game at all. There are videos all over YouTube just dissecting this entire thing. Great article by Jim Sterling on the issue, just pointing out a huge list of stuff that simply was not in the final product. So as far as I'm concerned, disclaiming it and saying this is from a demo version just doesn't cut it. I mean, you've got to go further than that. You've got to say, this stuff isn't in the game. It's like, this is not representative of the final product because half of this stuff isn't even in the game at all. It reminds me of some of the trailers for movies that come along with scenes that aren't actually in it at all. I'm like, wow, I was actually looking forward to seeing all of that scene, and yet that scene was just made up for the trailer. That's actually misrepresenting the movie, right? It's the same principle here, only as far as I'm concerned, far, far worse, because you're showing all the best bits in the trailer, and then those parts don't exist. Not only that, but you're representing the game in an unrealistic way, saying that, oh, yeah, the game could do all this stuff, and in reality it can't. So as far as I'm concerned, while this is a good step in the right direction, I don't feel that it is enough. Unfortunately, the games industry is plagued by this kind of bait and switch and misinformation. If you remember the Killzone 2 scandal, yeah, I certainly do. If you don't, then that was the trailer where they claimed, yeah, this is all in-game engine. It was actually pre-rendered. There's plenty of examples of them saying, yeah, this is running in real time on an Xbox 360, where in reality there was a hyper-powerful PC in the background actually powering the whole damn thing. Stuff that was supposedly a playable demo that was actually a pre-rendered demo. The bullshots, I mean, these still exist. These still exist on Steam, for God's sake. Like War Z, prime example of that. You go to War Z on Steam, you will find bullshots. Lots and lots of them. Shots that just don't exist in the game. Shots that have been deliberately touched up or deliberately manipulated in order to make the game look better than it actually is. That sucks, but it continues to happen. It's something that needs to be dealt with, and as far as I'm concerned, if trailers are misleading in that way, there needs to be some way for consumers to be warned of it. The problem is, right now, there kind of isn't. You release a game in the US, what are you going to do? Complain to the Better Business Bureau? Is that how far it's going to go? That's not really going to do much, I'm afraid. You know, I'd say that maybe it would be a good idea to have some kind of option to report to YouTube that a video is misleading, but I have no doubt that that would be abused to all hell, so who knows what to do about it. Except wait for honest gameplay. Yeah, there's a good idea. Just wait. You don't need that game on day one. Wait. For the love of God, just hold your horses. Let someone else take the hit for you first. It's like running away from a bear. You don't need to be fast to run away from a bear. You just need someone there that's slightly slower than you. Somewhere in my head, that analogy made sense. Well, by the time this video comes out, the Kickstarter for Torment Tides of Numenaria will be very close to being over. At the time of recording, it was 22 hours to go, and the Kickstarter was sitting on $3.7 million with 67,598 backers. At its current rate, it's looking very likely that it will beat the Obsidian Entertainment game Project Eternity, which raised $3.98 million on Kickstarter, although it's unlikely to pass the total for Star Citizen, which did fundraising on its own website prior to running a Kickstarter campaign. As a result, it's looking fairly likely that the Kickstarter will hit its $4 million target, which gives a stretch goal of expanded reactivity and depth, a number of legacies increased from 11 to 16, as well as an additional major city and more music by Mark Morgan. What this does mean, which is perhaps the biggest news for this particular Kickstarter, is that it went past 3.5 million, meaning that Chris Avellone actually joins the design team, which is massive in every possible respect, considering his contribution to the original. We've already had great news as a result of 3.25 million being raised, with Pat Rothfuss, the excellent writer indeed, joining the team. So there's a lot of talent moving on with this particular title now. I don't think anyone really expected this Kickstarter to fail, honestly. I mean, it's freaking Torment. Come on. And it continues to be one in a fairly long line of successful Kickstarters based on old nostalgic franchises. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we did want another game in this series. We did want another game based on Torment, even though they couldn't do it in the Planescape universe. We wanted more games in the classic RPG style, written by, designed by people like Brian Fargo and Chris Avellone. We wanted those guys involved. And, well, we gave them our money, and hopefully that will now happen. It's weird, though, to see this sort of running in parallel with Project Eternity. That in itself is quite strange. So here's hoping they'll screw it up. I think the worst thing that could possibly happen is that these games that became extremely successful on Kickstarter eventually end up coming out, and they suck. And wow, well, there won't be any chance of Kickstarter actually being successful for gaming after that happens, so hopefully it will not occur. And finally, a story that in itself is not that important, but I think perhaps has a few implications here and there, and a wider discussion topic could come from it. So, there's a League of Legends hero, I think it's pronounced Sejuani or something along those lines, who is supposedly an ice warrioress. And for some reason, prior to a recent redesign, rides around in the frozen wastes on the back of a boar in little more than a bikini, which is somewhat strange, to say the least. Now, Riot has said they're going to be redesigning the hero, claiming that Sejuani's lightly armored, skin-flaunting, fleshy apparel didn't mesh with the idea of a dominating ice warrior. Now, heavily armored atop a bristle, this visual rework clearly conveys the core of our concept for the champion. She's powerful, capable of conjuring the Freljord or something along those lines, and leading the Winter's Claw to victory, blah blah blah, lol lol. Anyway, it's so weird to hear that, yeah, this is the vision that really conveys the core concept. And how did the other one... you had this for like a year. I mean, this hero's been around for about a year or so. Why exactly did they believe that the core concept originally of this hero would have worked very well in a bikini? Is it the bloody Arctic or whatever the League of Legends equivalent of that is? It is quite silly, honestly. And I don't really think that this story in and of itself is all that important. Oh no, a League of Legends character got a redesign. But what I think is a little bit more important is the idea of designers thinking that this stuff is reasonable to begin with. I can understand if you're marketing towards teenagers, yeah? Teenagers, teenage males anyway, they really like skin, they like tits, they like ass. It's as simple as that. Everybody knows that. There's nothing necessarily wrong with pandering to them, but you've just got to be careful about your audience. League of Legends has a very wide audience. Dota has a very wide audience. These are big games. And as a result, you're going to find people, all walks of life, all ages, colors, and creeds involved in playing this game. So the last thing you want to do is alienate a portion of them by creating a character which is blatantly exploitative in some way that is aimed clearly at 13-year-olds. Now, you can say what you want about League of Legends character design. There's a couple of characters in that game that I think are fairly ridiculous in terms of the lack of clothing that they're wearing. Most of them are fairly sensible-ish. You know, they're kind of wearing armor that makes sense. Katarina's probably a good example of kind of the sex symbol of that particular game. I say that because I recall walking past the League of Legends area at PAX East and seeing a giant busty statue of Katarina that, let's just say, was not ugly by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm not saying female characters have to be ugly or anything along those lines, but another example of PAX East was Firefall. They're carting around these characters from the game, and there's the male character who's wearing practical body armor by the looks of it, covering most of his body. Looks like he is in a war. And there's the female character who appears to be wearing a cami-style leotard. I mean, where's the protection for the legs? Apparently your ass is made of, what, unobtainium? Who the hell knows? But I have to just scratch my head and think, well, why is this a good piece of character design? It's not even about sexism or anything along those lines. It's just about blatantly dumb design. We would think as a medium that we would have somewhat gotten past the idea that the old controversial advertising for Barbarian was the peak of culture when it comes to video games. Sensibly designed characters just make for better games. There are certain titles where you can get away with this stuff because there is a certain expectation. You don't go into Dead or Alive, for instance, and expect the characters to be dressed sensibly. That is a title which is flagrantly immature when it comes to how it deals with women. That is just a fact, and there are plenty of titles that also deal immaturely with men. I personally am just flat out sick of boring character design, whether it be beefy space marines or whether it be scantily clad women for no apparent reason. It just isn't interesting to me as a 28-year-old adult anymore. If I was 13, then yes, maybe I would be more interested in that kind of thing, but I've gotten past the point of needing to see virtual TNA. I can't take characters seriously anymore, especially in story-driven games where they're running around in completely impractical clothing and doing stupid stereotypical stuff that doesn't make any sense outside of a pixelated environment. Making an attractive female character in a video game and then putting it in scant clothing in order to attract the 13-year-old male demographic is a very easy thing to do, but it's also a very lazy thing to do. Generally speaking, it is as the result of a lack of ideas, a lack of originality, and way too much pandering. We could do without it. Feel free to make your characters attractive, but there are many, many ways of making a character look good and look attractive, or even go as far as to look beautiful without making them look like that instead of being part of a major ongoing war, they were in fact preparing for their shoot in FHM. There are, after all, only so many chainmail bikinis that one can stomach before it gets tiresome. Okay, folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. That's also me wrapped up for the week with this particular show. I'll be back on Monday with yet more gaming news and comment. Please have a safe and wonderful weekend. And I would like to notify you, by the way, that YouTube is in a state of balkedness once again, with channel pages not showing videos, feeds not showing videos, subscriber problems, all sorts of different stuff. I'm very sorry about that, even though I'm not personally responsible, and I would strongly recommend following our Twitter accounts because we always tweet new videos. That's twitter.com/TotalBiscuit, twitter.com/CynicalBrit, or alternatively, subscribe to the subreddit, which is reddit.com/r/CynicalBrit, or the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/CynicalBrit. Thank you for watching once again, and I will see you next time.